Hello, everyone, and we're back with another ramble, rant, blog post in audio form. Today, I wanted to do something that I've been meaning to do for quite a while now. Or rather, I had an idea of doing it back when I would say, I had the first initial thoughts about it and I want to say 2016, 2017. I wanted to do sort of very easy blog posting content in terms of series work, where every week I wanted to do something like a lyric breakdown, something that's deeper than just the ordinary, like basic Anthony Fantano, like lowest common denominator type of stuff that you see out there. Because, music still is a big part of my life. I am a visual artist, but music was, one of my first loves. But I noticed, I don't know why, I just didn't get around to doing it. And as it's harder to justify having to, like, physically write apart from a devoted sort of following of people who are willing to read longer things. It seems that this like weekly, daily blog post thing, as I've said before, unfortunately is a thing of the past, although there is a sort of revival here and there with Substack. And I actually, I will migrate to Substack from WordPress. I don't know if I'm going to go with the pay option right away. But before I go into this, please like, subscribe, share, comment, because we all know about the YouTube algorithm. When you have more critical engagement, it builds followers. And I don't know if my channel is like at the point where it's like blacklisted. I don't know if like comments that you post affect anything, but anyways, I don't know, maybe if I post more art related content I can somehow trick the algorithm. I should start doing that. Actually, should start just recording me doing those, like, I don't know, Bob Ross sketches where I bang one out in less than, I would say, 15 minutes. And I should just slap some of my friends' music on it, and there you go. I mean, if I get past 1,000 subs, I could start monetizing things, although nobody makes real money off of YouTube anymore unless you're on a certain place. But anyways, I'm getting distracted. What I wanted to do today was something that I've been meaning to do for a while, which is to do a series of analyzing very meaningful lyrics, but I didn't want to associate it with a series, what I'm doing here, because I feel that the song that I'm breaking down has a great significance, not just in terms of the canon of rock history, but also, I would say, in terms of, truly I believe this, in terms of Western civilization in general. And Western civilization confronting its own unconscious. So the song I am talking about today is one very close, one of the first, non-metal songs that are very close to my heart, because the majority of them tend to be various genres of metal. The song "The End" by The Doors. The lyrics written by the prolific, visionary, prophetic Jim Morrison. And I know that the cult of Jim Morrison, it's not, I don't think it's around that much, but it's very difficult to separate the cultish rock star image of the poet, philosopher, musician on the edge. That's sort of like Oliver Stone version of Jim Morrison and Jim Morrison the man. But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about, hopefully I think this will take quite a while, because I have preliminary thoughts and I'm going to go over like literally every single piece of lyric from The End. But generally, I wanted to do this because I remember I wrote something these scratch notes way back in, I would say, 2016, even 2015, I forget. It was 2016. This just like basic rambling schizo post in between classes about the meaning of The Doors, or rather the meaning of the song The End, and why it's so apropos in the film Apocalypse Now. So what I wanted to talk about today is the meaning of the song The End, its relation to Apocalypse Now, and its relation to this greater question of the unconscious of Western civilization itself, which is a tall order. But basically, to give you some background, the actual writer for Apocalypse Now, what's his name? John Milius, he was doing this interview with Francis Ford Coppola. They were talking about what it was like making Apocalypse Now and then making the subsequent documentary, A Filmmaker's Apocalypse. And I remember this one part in A Filmmaker's Apocalypse where Francis Ford Coppola, he talks about how difficult it was, famously, to work with Marlon Brando. He would literally, he didn't even read The Heart of Darkness, which is what Apocalypse Now is based off of, Joseph Conrad's book. He didn't even read it, so they would have to, he would read passages to Marlon Brando at nighttime, and he would literally do stitches of dialogue. He would ramble on, and he would randomly just walk off the set, and you wouldn't see him for 3 days. So he would just walk off. He's like, I can't think of any lines today. And I remember when I saw Apocalypse Now very, very long time ago, and I actually, I think, I never told anyone this, but the first book that started my prolific bibliophile book spending spree that has lasted till now was The Golden Bough by Sir James Fraser. And the reason I did that was because it was on the table in that famous monologue of Kurt's when he's in the lair, when Willard is in there and he's talking about the horror. And that was one of the first books I bought because it was on his table. So the Filmmaker's Apocalypse, so there's this interview with John and Francis Ford Coppola, and he was talking about how he knew the guys from The Doors. I think because I know Jim Morrison went to film school. I think the other guys did, I forget. But basically he said that, I think this was after Jim Morrison had died. He talked about how the song, when he was writing the script for Apocalypse Now, he was writing the screenplay, he kept thinking about the end and how that was the perfect song for the film, and how it made him think of war and destruction and apocalypse. And they all looked at him. I think he said they all looked at him and they're like, "What are you talking about, man?" That's because they're still in that musician hippie mindset. So I think that Jim Morrison was really getting at something deeper than what the song appears, because a lot of people talk about how this is a perennial sort of work of lyricism and songwriting. It is sort of the perennial philosophy distilled into song form. It's really an alchemical, metaphysical song in a lot of ways. And people say the relation to things like Kundalini Yoga and psychedelia and so forth. But I think what Jim Morrison, even if he wasn't consciously aware of this, was trying to tap into an apocalypticism, an end, a Spenglerian transformation of the decline and fall of Western civilization in the experience of psychedelia itself. So there is, I hate to say this, and I've said this before, I've said this on Break the Rules, unfortunately, about a lot of this visionary art. A lot of it tends to come off as what I call psychedelic kitsch, meaning that it's literally a self-contained world that all art expresses something, but it's explicitly trying to, it's more of a, I guess what Boris Groys would call a cartography of art. It's more of trying to analyze, or rather seamlessly depict, not even analyze, but rather seamlessly depict an experience And that experience goes into a style. And of course, there is this problem with automatism. There's this problem with art bibliography and art cartography, which is what is the direct experience and what is the art that influences that direct experience influencing that art. So it's like this feedback loop, because suddenly Alex Grey paints in a certain style. Now digital artists come and they paint in that, they render in that certain style. And now we have this feedback loop where people, they're taking drugs, and it's like, do they see the same visions as they were intended to be, or are they dropping acid and they are seeing a psychedelic vision of what Alex Grey saw and what Alex Grey intended for that vision to be, or Robert Venoza or Martina Hoffman or whoever, right? So these are the problems. But Jim Morrison, I think, was tapping into something deeper, which is, and the reason I bring up psychedelic visionary art is that he was realizing the potential of the apocalyptic vision within the end of that I know I said the word within the end of that experience. So it isn't the thing of, this positive, you go to any like lyric interpretation. I'm a millennial, so we relied on songmeanings.com. And I'm sure Zoomers, they have like Genius Lyrics, I think it's just Genius now. So we have this, these connotations of the end. It's like, well, it's about the psychedelic experience, it's a personal experience, and it's about Nietzsche's will to power, because of course Jim Morrison was a prolific reader and fan of Nietzsche, and it's about, of course, like Freud, the Oedipal complex, and so forth. And certainly those themes are there, and I'll talk about them in depth. But I think the greater picture is that it truly is a transformational alchemical work of art, in that it's expressing a certain epoch that I don't even think was realized in Jim Morrison's time, or in the time of the setting of this song of the Vietnam War. I feel that this took up until now to fully realize, in some crazy weird way, because Jim Morrison, he had a lot of like, and the thing is, it's hard to tell when it comes to prophecy. It could just be a combination of foreseeing certain trends and having people who are more perceptible than others. But Jim Morrison, he said some things about our time period, like for instance, the future of music would be one guy with a bunch of machines making music on his own, which is largely true. I mean, come on, it's even just one person with a computer. So I feel that Jim Morrison was trying to tap into something, so through the psychedelic experience that the song alludes to very heavily, you don't get a positive vision of transformation. You do have an implication of personal transformation within the song, but rather it's hitting at some deeper content, some archetypal, very, I would almost say, nefarious themes, and it's aiming for an apocalyptic vision of the psychedelic rather than the affirming, like, feel-good, New Agey spirituality that unfortunately the New Age movement has suffered from. Because even like Terence McKenna talked about, ostensibly talked about apocalypse with Time Wave Zero, but to him it was like the singularity, and it's like there's a little bit of transhumanism in it, and there's a little bit of like cyberdelia, like these machines are spiritual machines, and if, I don't know, we plug in the right sort of what's the word for total art in Germany? Let me look this up. Pardon my German, but it's Gesamtkunstwerk, the total work of art, the complete work of art, not the complete work of art, but rather a work of art that makes use of all or many art forms or strive to do so. So this is very similar to if you read, there was this great book about the creation of heavy metal album art. It's called And Justice for Art, where the cover for Cynic, and all Cynic albums the band Cynic, all the albums come from the visionary painter Robert Venoza, R.I.P., God rest his soul. And they talk about how Venoza met Paul Masvidal, who's the leader of Cynic, and he was talking about how he wanted to create a total artwork that utilizes sound and image and color and every single aspect of human performance. And he thought that bands like Cynic were paving the way for this. And so this is the total artwork, I feel, of Jim Morrison. The man as an image, as an archetype, as a cultural creation, but also someone who is a man out of his time, but yet uniquely in it. That's very rare for certain people. So the total artwork of the sort of psychedelic vision is accompanied by this apocalyptic sort of like end, decline, the autumn winter period of civilization. And similarly, Terence McKenna, when he was describing the experiment at La Terrera, talked about how they thought incorporating different sounds accompanied by images, accompanied by flashing lights, by all of these different experiences while they were high out of their minds for, I forget, 14 days or something like that, that they would bring about this psychedelic entity, this philosophic alchemical stone that could potentially, be the harbinger of the time wave zero, the singularity, the event. And so then when internet technology arose more prominently in the popular psyche, then Terence McKenna, shifted to a lot of the cyberdelic thought. People like Douglas Ruskow, at the time he met McKenna, the tech journalist writer, and talked about this, but I feel that Jim Morrison, predating all of that, was closer to a total work of art in this one song. And what I mean by the apocalyptic vision is there is this tone throughout the song of a total collapse, a calamity, and the way that after the second chorus, the way that it breaks down, and of course the famous scene in Apocalypse Now where Willard finally kills Kurtz. He arises from the muck of the unconscious, and as the boat travels down the river, it goes further into the heart of darkness, into the collective unconscious. And it's always that Willard is half in the light, half in the dark. And Jung talks about this a lot in dream symbolism. And, Kurtz is always in the dark. And at the end, he has to self-overcome that sort of will to power aspect of overcoming oneself and creating something anew, and then rejecting the old order of Kurtz by refusing to take up his mantle as this god-man, as this demigod among the Montagnard tribes. So Kurtz then Willard kills Kurtz in this very dramatic scene where it's like the height of the song of during the piano solo. It's like the height of the upswing in the latter half of the end where he, machetes Kurtz, and again at the very end everything's calm. He says, the horror, meaning that for that brief moment, Kurtz retained his humanity, and he realized the horror that he has inflicted, and the horror that he's utilized, and the horror that he's befriended in the backdrop of the Vietnam War. And the reason that the end is such a powerful song accompanied with the narrative of Apocalypse Now is because, similar to the, source text of the movie, which is Joseph Conrad's, Heart of Darkness, where the declining British Empire was directly confronting its unconscious in Africa, so too does America confront its own unconscious in the various excursions into Indochina and Vietnam and elsewhere. And I think that a lot of this psychic energy was unleashed where the West, the American Empire, again, was beautifully illustrated by Apocalypse Now. It couldn't confront the various forces within its own unconscious because, of course, the West has this emphasis on, objectivity and conscious criticism and full presence and in framing, and it's no longer, it's, strict dualism, like post-Cartesian dualism. It's no longer about this holistic integration of every aspect of the psyche and of the soul, or rather the non-soul, if we're talking about, Indochina, this sort of, monism, this driving heart of the East. Again, it's very difficult to describe because, I don't want to sound like one of these people, but it's difficult because then it's like, there is this thing with Orientalism. Although I think that a lot of Said's thesis is bogus, there is something to be said about cultural appropriation and Orientalism and objectifying these people or exoticizing them. But I do feel that, during the Vietnam War, of this American empire confronting the East, but yet it's confronting itself. That was the whole plot. And Willard is the representative of the babe in the woods. He's just a soldier doing his orders. It's really this poetic narrative of what it's like for someone who isn't ready to confront their own horror, to confront the unconscious, these various antipodes of the mind. And so in the song, The End, it talks about this, this inner hiddenness of the unconscious and this, soul of collective humanity, especially within Western civilization. So and this is why it's so much more profound than just seeing the next Alex Gray painting, because it's a recognition of the psychedelic experience being able to deliver you horror rather than a positive vision. And so let's, these themes are all jumbled in my head, and it's I think over the years thinking about it, to actually verbalize it is difficult because these are themes that have been kicking around in my mind for a very long time. And so let us go through all of the lyrics. But before that, I wanted to say this quote from Carl Jung, which I think is illuminating. Now, he calls it China, but I would say that maybe Vietnam could be extended to this. So he says, and this is from Dream Symbols of the Individuation Process. I think that was it in Aeon, or was it in... No, it couldn't have been Civilization in Transition. I could be wrong. I forget what exactly of collective works it's from. But here Jung says, the Chinese mind in many ways represents the unconscious of the West. I often wonder whether many Western traits might not be discovered in the composition of the Chinese unconscious. I'm not sure about it, but it is quite certain that our unconscious contains a lot of Chinese ways, manners, similarities, and so forth. Similes. Then he says, if we were looking for historical parallels, Jungian psychology could more readily be compared to the original Taoism of China. Wisdom embraces the whole of human life. Now, I know that they're doing fundamentally different things, and again, this is the problem with perennialism in general, which is, especially when you factor in Jung as perennialist, there is a problem with translation, there's a problem with equivalences, which is something that my mentor / grad supervisor when I was in philosophy, he viciously had to mock this out of me. He had to mock this sort of tendency I had towards very superficial similarities from my perennialism thing. And so I feel that there isn't a direct equivalence, but you can see, especially when you read Jung's commentary on The Secrets of the Golden Flower, a Chinese book of life, where it talks about Taoist alchemy, you can see this process of the integration of the whole of being, but also something that is beyond being and non-being. So the reason I bring this up is because even Jung, again, a big inspiration on the analysis of Apocalypse Now, the analysis of the Doors even, is really pertinent in this sense, because when you're talking about the unconscious, so here's another quote from his letters. The unconscious itself is neither trickery nor evil. It is nature, both beautiful and terrible. But the best way of dealing with the unconscious is the creative way, meaning that you have to creatively integrate the whole of the unconscious into yourself. So then he says, as far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light of meaning in the darkness of mere being. So that was, again, this is pertinent because in Apocalypse Now, it talks about, and even in the end, it talks about this sort of lighting the way of being against the more destructive shadow forces of the unconscious. But this is not merely contained to like a personal journey of Willard or a personal journey of like, oh, well, Jim Morrison was bombing a lot of acid, so that's why he had this like personal transformation. The personal transformation, again, it's like the Platonic city and soul analogy. It's like the as above, so below. This is like, basic Axis Mundi, basic like perennialist language here, but the basic theme being that any reflection of personal transformation is a reflection of the transformation of whole civilizations and whole spiritual epochs and yugas and transformations and so forth, etc. So here we're going to start, finally, before all of that preamble. Hopefully, actually reading the lyrics can organize my thoughts better. So the intro, this is the end, beautiful friend, this is the end, my only friend, the end. So the end or death, I'm reading Genius lyrics, the end or death is understood by Morrison as beautiful and appealing thing. So what he means by the end, I feel that this again is indicative of the great transformation that comes about from a total collapse of signifiers and meaning, because we have to realize the historical context. Now I know that this is debated among literary studies about, what is it, the new criticism, historicism. You have to always, recognize the time period, but then people, other people like, Strauss goes, no, you have to recognize the transhistorical truths that are latent within literature. I don't know. I feel that these debates are kind of fruitless because it's like a bit of both. I mean, I hate to be like, oh, it's the middle way, man, but it's true. I feel that you do have to recognize the historical context. So here we have when Jim Morrison is writing, and also the experiences he had as a child, being like a military brat and moving a lot. And again, when he says the West is the best, he means like the West of the United States. I know a lot of like conservative boomers, they have this idea that Jim Morrison was like, I don't know, some secret like conservative or something. It could be. I mean, I don't think he was a secret conservative. I think he was a secret, reactionary, obviously, because he was tapping into things that were much deeper and much more primordial than the common, like, post-hippie social movement discourse of the 60s New Left. So you hear Morrison was saying the end, this is the end, my beautiful friend. There's this great longing in every single syllable here. There's this great disposition of grief and lament towards, it says this reference or concept of the end could be about ego death or breaking the boundaries of human perception, as in experiencing LSD or other entheogens used by shamans, blah, blah, blah. But let's bracket that for a moment. Let's look at the bigger picture. The bigger context being is that by the 1960s, there was a great collapse of signifiers. There was a great collapse of cultural narratives. There was a great collapse of the heliocentric Christian world that sustained the West for centuries. And there was a blending of civilizations brought about by various forces that were older than people think. Like, people talk about globalization, but it is much more of an older phenomenon. But when it comes to direct diffusions of cultural, religious, shamanic, artistic, different content, there was a direct blending of everything in a giant whirlwind. And so then you get things like the New Age movement, obviously, which is in a lot of ways a sort of rootless modernist movement. As much as I've spent so many years, talking about and exploring and researching the New Age movement, I do feel that it's indicative of that rootlessness of the West that has set in its autumn period. Because every time a great civilization is collapsing within itself, it looks outwards towards what is exotic, what is the other. The Romans did it, the Greeks did it, blah, blah, blah. You know all the story. In China, they did it, well, in China, they didn't actually. The problem is that they were too inward focused. But so here we have this recognition of the great destruction of meaning. Again, this is like Jim Morrison. And this, again, I hate to say it, I hate ragging on them, but the hippies, they really got this wrong. They didn't get it wrong. They were sort of right about how he's looking into the eyes of his friend when they're tripping, and it's like, oh, this great transformation. But he got it wrong because they didn't factor in the Nietzschean aspect of it. Of course, Jim Morrison read The Twilight of Idols. Of course, he read The Genealogy of Morals and, Zarathustra. Obviously, Zarathustra, I think, was his his most beloved work of Nietzsche. So Jim Morrison is really commenting on what the typical Nietzschean dawn of the last man, of the death of God, meaning that the way that the West interprets the belief in the Abrahamic faiths, the monotheistic deity, of the great collapse of that sort of religiosity in this mass period of disenchantment. And Jim Morrison is saying, yes, this is the end. This is the breaking into a period of apocalypse. This is the dawn of the last man. This is when people are going to encounter, but here's the difference being is that people are going to encounter unconscious forces that they're not prepared for because they don't have a proper context. So people in the 60s, even nowadays, the hipsters that go to the Amazon basin, shamanic tourism, Westerners going out to these exotic lands and bombing different drugs and totally ripping them from their original shamanic context and utilizing these entheogens in ways that they were never meant to use. So this is the end, right, my beautiful friend? So of elaborate plans, the end. Of everything that stands, the end. No safety or surprise, the end. I'll never look into your eyes again. So the eyes, of course, are a very important archetypal image. So this line should be praised for its haunting majesty, as it could not fit most sublimely with the amorphous concept of the end. So again, amorphous concept of the end. Consider these interpretations and how each work depends on how one in turn interprets the concept of the end. I'll never look into your eyes. I'll never see you again. We'll cross different paths. I'll never see you again because one or both of us is dead. So again, it could mean the ego death, but it could also mean the ego death of the West encountering these unconscious forces within the Orient. And I know as exoticist or orientalist as that sounds, it really is apt. So no safety or surprise, the end of everything is stands. So the genius lyrics, they say nihilistic lines like this support the producer Paul Rothschild's interpretation of the song as a protest of all hierarchy, whether based on gender or class. No. This is Nietzschean. This is not like the hippie. Here's the thing. By the 70s, all of that hippie optimism was murdered in favor of like the proto versions of woke identity politics. So all of these connotations that this was a great liberation that Jim Morrison, it's like they've just read the lyrics. They haven't listened to the gravity and the weight and the darkness of the song itself. They don't realize that, Jim Morrison being a Nietzschean, this is a lament of the mixing of castes, of the destruction of gender, of the destruction of the very beliefs, systems, and hierarchies that sustained people within Western civilization for aeons. Like, this isn't like some, and let's read the thing here. So someone says, this sort of end that Morrison describes, if applied to death, describes the death as being both eventual and able to be mistaken or surprised by. No, I think what he means by, and again, this is my interpretation, again, every art critic, they all see what they want to see, but my interpretation is that Jim Morrison is saying no safety or surprise, the end, meaning that in times of great calamity, whether it's a physical death of a civilization like the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, or whether it's a psychic death of a civilization, the collapse of all common cultural and religious and philosophic signifiers and artistic aesthetic signifiers, you have this sort of period of where you just expect that things are going to get worse. You just expect there is no safety, there's no surprise. Again, there's a saying in Italian, everything in life is a tragedy, but yet it's not surprising. So, desperately in need of some stranger's hand in a desperate land. So, the West is clawing for a stranger's hand. The West is grasping for another belief system, but yet it can't be fully integrated because it's not meant to be fully integrated except for a great calamity happening. So you have the A side, the B side, the unconscious. What Jung meant with that quote being that the unconscious of the Orient, the Chinese, the West, the non-West, the East, that has always been, that's always been, propped up next to as a reflection of the Western psyche. It is the depths. It is the unconscious energy. It is, mutual origination. It is a totally different, radical, oceanic, you could say, the oceanic feeling. It is that totality that is different from the processes of instrumental reason and reification and dualism and utilitarianism that the West has been, inhabited by for God knows how long, since the Enlightenment. So, no safety or surprise, desperately in need of some stranger's hand in a desperate land. This is one of my favorite, by the way, so Jim Morrison, he says, can you picture what will be so limitless and free? Jim Morrison says, sometimes the pain is too much to examine or even tolerate. That doesn't make it evil, though, or necessarily dangerous. So again, this is like Nietzsche, this is Jung, but people fear death even more than pain. It's death denial. It's strange that they fear death. Life hurts a lot more than death. At this point, if death pain is over. Then he says he was given a voice, so this is a music reviewer. He was giving a voice in a rock and roll setting to the Oedipal complex. At the time, a widely discussed tendency in Freudian psychology. So again, this is like, the 60s and 70s. This was like the birth of psychoanalysis was almost like a religion to certain bourgeois upper class people. In coastal cities. He wasn't saying he wanted to do this on his own mom and dad. He was reenacting a bit of Greek drama. It was theater. Ray Mazarek. I think was that the guy from Rolling Stones? I think so. But I don't know. I disagree with that, but I'll get into that. So, lost, this is my favorite line, one of my favorites. Lost in a Roman wilderness of pain, all the children are insane. All the children are insane, waiting for the summer rain. So, lost in a Roman wilderness of pain? Hello? Decline of the West? Roman Empire? Come on? Like, I know it seems obvious, but mythologically, so then Genius Lyric says this refers to ancient Roman mythology, similarly for the awakening of one's mind during a psychedelic experience, which can be, but then someone comments saying that no, it's not about the psychedelic experience. It's literally a line within the Heart of Darkness. The entire song is inspired by the book Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, which is also the basis of the film Apocalypse Now. Lost in the Roman Wilderness of Pain is straight out of one of the opening paragraphs of the book. I was thinking of very old times when the Romans first came here, so meaning like the Helm of Africa. Here and there, military came lost in the wilderness. They must have been dying like flies, which was true. All the children are insane. All the children are insane, waiting for the summer rain. So rain symbolizes something that builds up some time, can enrich the land or destroy it. So, for example, the chemical warfare, Agent Orange of Vietnam. Summer rain is also refreshing. It's something that is enjoyed, usually because of intense heat. So Jim Morrison, at the time, I think when he was in California, the summer rain is like something that is sought after in a lot of like arid climates. The summer rain is symbolic, so all of the children are insane. All of the children are insane, waiting for the summer rain, meaning that, like again, the Nietzschean concept of the child being the harbinger of a new order, being the future philosopher that Zarathustra predicts will be for the path of the few. This is powerful because now that it's like in the West we've lost all sources of meaning and signification and religiosity. It's like we're children dancing in the muck. We're waiting for the summer rain to come, meaning that we're waiting for a replenishing, a spring phase, a new order to come about and sort of replete us and give us new substance from the great calamity of the past. So I think that is one of the most powerful lines in the whole song. Lost in a Roman wilderness of pain, all the children are insane. As societies collapse, we see, like in the Roman Empire, again, I know it's a stereotypical analysis because there's various complex manifold causes of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. But in our own empire, in the Empire of the West, North America, you can see that people are going insane. And Jim Morrison was seeing this in the 60s, but look at nowadays. Come on, do I have to explain it? Do I gotta go down the whole reactionary trad analysis of like things are degenerate, things are evil, things are lacking in enchantment, people are dancing like idiots in the streets, people are reenacting inverted postmodern versions of ritual, but they are doing it as a postmodern reemergence of mythos. So, for example, in Argentina, women have a right to destroy their offspring. There's new dancing around pyres in the streets. I mean, come on, this is the Great Mother. And again, in this song, the Great Mother comes about, the terrible, all-consuming mother, because at the end of every single civilization, there is a reemergence of the Great Mother. But also there are, all the sort of Roman decadence people talk about, that came at the end of the Roman Empire. That came, then you had the vomitoriums, the orgies, the mixing of castes, the debauchery, the loss of all purpose and meaning, the sort of destruction of that very decrepit hierarchical class system in the Roman Empire in the declining years. So you have all of this lost in a Roman wilderness of pain, and of course Jim Morrison is meaning the another common theme. I know it's like cliche to compare America and Rome. I think the better take would be that America is becoming like Sarajevo in 1995 or like Medellin in the 80s. Who knows, right? Russia in the 1990s. So, but the comparison here, because of course this thought that like America is the new Rome, this was quite popular at the time, where Jim Morrison is looking at the Vietnam War and he's looking at what's happening and he's seeing how a lot of the excursions are stretching thin, not just the material resources, but the psychic resources of Western civilization itself. So lost in a Roman wilderness of pain, we are doomed to, the eternal recurrence of the same. We are doomed to reenact the follies of previous empires, not just the Roman Empire, but all other empires. And now the graveyard is in the far east, the place where we confronted our unconscious. So here we have, there's a danger on the edge of town. Danger is something we fear. The edge of town refers to someone that is outside the unfamiliar, the unknown, the limit, the unconscious terrain, going into the collective unconscious. Polarizing public opinion, us versus them, is effective and traditional method for these in power to mobilize. Again, this is very simplistic kind of analysis. The King's Highway is another theme of the Oedipal complex. So, riding the King's Highway, baby. Weird scenes inside the gold mine. Ride the highway, baby. Ride the snake to the lake, the ancient lake. The snake, of course, being the Kundalini snake, the chakra energy that coils around your spine. The snake, he's long 7 miles, 7 chakras. Ride the snake, he's old, his skin is cold. So, there's danger on the edge of town, meaning that there is a confrontation with the collective unconscious in a time of great conflict and mistrust, in a time of great decline. Ride the King's Highway, baby. So again, this is common like with the Greek theater, the Oedipus. Even people interpreted I'll never look into your eyes again, meaning like when Oedipus like stabs his eyes out after he realizes he how the story goes. So this to me, I feel is, this part of the analysis is like approaching like Jay Dyer like territory, where he says weird scenes inside the gold mine, meaning that where Jim Morrison was near, a lot of 60s rock stars, a lot of serial killers, a lot of occult people, all gravitated around Laurel Canyon. And I don't know if Laurel Canyon was there was a gold mine. It was certainly part of the gold rush, that era in California. But there's a lot of strange, weird things that happen around Laurel Canyon. I do believe that the Myth of the 20th Century guys have an episode about Laurel Canyon where they talk about these various like weird occurrences, especially around the later half of the 20th century. How all of these different forces culminating in California. There's a great Sallow thread on it about how California as a whole like feels like fundamentally off, like there's something weird going on. So who knows if Jim Morrison was saying like all of these occultic influences was gravitating him towards like this particular spot. But also in terms of just straight up psychedelia, this is the plunging of the depths, either the ocean or the cave, the gold mine, taking out nuggets of gold from one's psyche, the antipodes of the mind. And so the ride the snake, Kundalini. The West is the best. Get here and we'll do the rest. So it sounds like a killer would tell you to pay a visit. Everything would be fine. Sounds like an allusion to American propaganda enticing people to come to the Western world. But when they arrive, the politics of our society devour them. As we know that many immigrants in America don't exactly thrive. Or it could be that America is consuming itself by migration, by saying that, you know, the globalization of the world is really the Americanization of the world, and that the forces of deculturation are stomping upon every single sacred land in the world. And, you know, the West goes to you, you come to the West, and it's this giant state monolith destroying the war machines of culture throughout the world. So, imprinting on it, so this language, so the West is the best, is just a metaphor for the end of the American West, is seen as the edge of Western civilization, the end of the world. Jim is doubting here, doubling some lines, is just how it sounds, but there could be a deeper meaning to it. Morrison could be referring to the setting of the sun in the west. So again, this is like, again, a lot of the unconscious of America in particular is this theme of the closing of the West, the Turner thesis, the closing of the wild frontier, and the total civilization colonization of the wild, of the dangers and the excitement and the rugged yeoman farmer / cowboy ideal. This comes about in every single piece of American media. The closing of the frontier. So in Canada, we don't have that because I had this one history teacher, although she's, what would you call it, educated shitlib. I made the mistake of browsing her Facebook one time a few years ago. In high school, I had this teacher, we were talking about this, about how in Canada, the order came before the wild. So the British, they were telling, gold panners, they were inspecting them, and they had to have certain gear, and it was regulated by the Mounties and so forth, and the various British stock corporations. But, America has this mythology of it being wild and rugged, and them conquering the wilderness, the West, the frontier. And when the frontier is closed, finally, there is this great lament that is reflected throughout every single piece of American media and mythology and painting and song and just the general philosophy of America itself is this great lament of its wild heart and its wild nature being closed in by the forces of civilization. The blue bus is calling, driver, where are you taking us? So the blue bus is a clever double meaning. First is the use to mean Santa Monica's blue bus, big blue bus system, but it could also be the drug oxymorphine. Could also be referring to peyote. The blue bus is the journey. So this is from the book Break On Through the Life and Death of Jim Morrison. The blue bus is the journey to paradise where all things possible can be accomplished only by surrounding your final destination to the driver of the blue bus. The journey here is both physical and spiritual. So again, like Willard and Kurtz, except it's the riverboat. The journey here is both physical and spiritual. Manzarek discusses this aspect of the song. The ancient Egyptian civilization, in their rites and religious rituals, had the solar boat. Again, I think this is where this is the inspiration for Apocalypse Now. The solar boat where you died when you go in the solar boat, whenever you want. The whole big journey after kind of death in the solar boat. While the big being, heavenly color, blue being associated with mysticism and trips. So again, like the blueness of Shiva, which again is the creator and destroyer, right? The end of a civilization, the beginning of another one, the beginning of another sort of structure of meaning and some collective symbols and signifiers. The bus also associates with trips. It's also one of the trips you could possibly imagine, blah, blah, blah. Here, Jim Morrison, someone says predicting the end of the world. Yeah, that's a good interpretation. So, the big blue bus, so this could be like a drug trip, but that's also the final trip of the end of an order and the beginning of a new one. It's the passageway that matters. Hence why so much dream content comes from passage and journeys and being chased and going into canyons and coming out the other side. So, we all know this break on through to the other side. We all know the connotations there, the psychedelic spiritual connotations. Now we get to the most controversial, the most talked about part. We have right in the middle, the most famous lines that directly point to Greek mythology, the Oedipal complex. So the killer awoke before dawn. The killer awoke before dawn. He put his boots on. So in Genius Lyrics, it says the whole verse ending with "Mother, I want to" draws parallel between drafted U.S. soldiers sent to Vietnam and the anti-hero of ancient Greek mythology, Oedipus. These narratives employ the moral thread of suffering develops the soul, process extolled by Nietzsche and superhuman Übermensch. Morrison was more familiar with Nietzsche's literature and its correlation. So again, so the birth of tragedy would be the go-to here. Essentially, you have limit acts that Bataille talks about. You have the realities of the profane and the sacred coming together and mixing themselves, and in great calamities that literally destroy the self and destroy the civilization that the self is within, so acts of war. But Vietnam wasn't just a war, it was, you could say it was the first guerrilla insurgency that America fought, although they did, the Philippines was kind of like that, but the first major one. Vietnam was literally confronting the reality of the threat hiding in the shadows. So Vietnam was different in the sense that you had this confrontation with the East, confrontation with, in the global new sphere, the unconscious of the West. So here you have this limit act of war, and it's almost as if he's intuiting what other people discussed about the phenomenological experience of war, or rather the metaphysical experience of war in its act. So, for example, there was this great documentary, I think it was called First Kill. It was around the Vietnam War journalist Michael Herr, who I believe he, did he kill himself? I forget. He wrote this book called Dispatches, where he talked about his experiences of being like typical New York journalist of a certain upper class and ethnic variety, if you know what I mean. So he talks about the sensuousness of war and the lusciousness of war and seeing things that you've never seen before. and there is really an awakening of man's primordial instincts within such an environment out in the jungle. But to relate this to the central theme, you have the archetype of the thief, the murderer in the night, coming forth. Oh, and by the way, I'm also reading here that Michael Herr previously contributed to the narration of Coppola's film Apocalypse Now. So we've come full circle to this connection between in the end and Michael Herr's book Dispatches. So there is this narrative of the confrontation of the antipods, the confrontation with the antipods of the mind, the archetypal forces, the forces that were lost in secular, deracinated, hyper-rational modern civilization now coming into fold. And the New Age movement it's funny how the New Age movement arose at the same time of the Vietnam War. So now the West is fully like a babe in the woods being integrated into its shadow self. It's a doppelganger B-side. So here we go. He put on his boots on. He took a face from the ancient gallery. He walked down the hall. And of course, he went to his room sister. He went to his, paid a visit to his brother. Then, they had to, I think they censored it in the recording. He said, "Father, yes, son, I want to kill you. Mother, I want to," all night long. So I believe the record companies, they didn't, they didn't let that fly. So this spoken word section of the song is reference to the myth of Oedipus, the king of Thebes, who fulfilled the prophecy of murdering his father, marrying his mother. In Freudian philosophy, wow. The Oedipal myth is what creates laws against incest, which is symbolic of our entry into humanity. Morality represents the end of happiness. Yeah, because it really is a limit on that what Freud called that polymorphous perversity, where everything is not delineated, everything is not delineated, everything is open up to sexual gratification, but also gratification on a deeper level. Because I'm much more in line with Jung here. I believe that what Morrison is talking about isn't just the strict, it's the Oedipal complex. The Oedipal complex is something deeper. It is a return to the Great Mother in all acts of the dissolution of the self, or the dissolution of the greater civilization qua self. The Great Mother always tends to return. Everything goes back to the Mother. So this is the most primordial symbol. This is the deepest layer of the soul, the collective soul, the collective unconscious. So this is, he's saying, he walked in down the hall, "Father, yes, son, I want to kill you, mother, I want to marry," he took a face from the ancient gallery. Of course, the face, the symbol of the mask, is such an important and integral symbol to every single time period, every single civilization throughout human history. It's funny how now the mask, without getting too much into this because YouTube algorithm, the mask is sort of this symbol of medicalization, and it's been taken up by the amount of hyper-instrumental reason, this worship of expertism, this the logos of modern, the driving force of modern civilization being what people have called the apparatuses of biosecurity. But the mask is such an ancient symbol that has so many different functions that now Jim Morrison is saying that in these limit acts, in these times of great transition, we are going to once again take up a mask from the ancient gallery. We are going to embrace the primordial once more by reenacting a sort of ritualism, even if it's got this high-tech overlay. It still has this embodiment of the mythic. So imagine you are like a Vietnamese rice farmer and you see these giant, green giant Americans with machine guns. I think that was the line from the second part that nobody remembers because Sergeant Hartman just really stole the whole movie. But the second part in Full Metal Jacket, I forget who it was, that said, look at us, we're jolly green giants storming through the jungle with guns. And you talked about the dead Vietnamese soldier next to him, how they're a worthy adversary. So we have here this great recognition of the return to mythos in this confrontation with the unconscious. So consider Morrison's military upbringing, his tendency to proclaim his parents were dead. The father makes sense as metaphor for alien conceptions. The mother is a reference to Mother Nature, the natural. By doing the mother, one is returning to natural conceptions and hence reality. Morrison meant by this the end of the alien concept, return to personal. I think it's more than that. I think it's to destroy the father, to destroy the order of the father, is to destroy the voice of authority and the voice of hierarchy. But Morrison isn't necessarily there's some, he's saying, come on baby, yeah, fuck yeah, come on baby, this is the end, beautiful friend, this is the end, my only friend. So you can say that it's a positive message of hippie affirmation of destroying new left hippie destroying authority and hierarchy. But I think it's something more than that. I think it's deeper. I think it's Morrison saying that in times of great calamity and in great destruction of all cultural signifiers and religious meaning, you will have this celebration of the disillusionment. But at the same time, people are cheering on and celebrating the disenchantment and the disillusion of various signifiers and sources of meaning. You will have a re-entry of myth into the picture. You will have the primordial chaotic forces that counter forces such as logos, such as Christianity, that warded people off from all of this Gnostic chaos. Now you're going to come full circle, and within this so-called disenchantment by instrumental reason and by hyper-rationality, you will see a weird reintroduction of mythos. And so the 60s were the literal flower children, the boomers that refused to grow up until they did, and they, sold out, except for the very few hippies that stayed the course. They became back to the landers, or they moved to India to start some commune, or they all came back in the 80s, but you know what I mean. The authentic ones, the vast majority of them became the system, so that's worth considering. So this has just been all of these different threads, I feel, are connected into one whole, one great work in one song, The End. And this, I think, truly is Jim Morrison's magnum opus. And of course it wouldn't have been the same if it were not for the great musicians that were in the Doors and who had a very unique approach to psychedelic rock at the time. They were forward-thinking. They weren't, as much as I love guitar-driven music, you wouldn't consider them a guitar-driven band. The fact that they were doing things like using world instruments and layering with the keyboards, and they weren't necessarily doing what other bands were doing at the time, going full force into experimenting with guitar-driven rock music. I feel that this is really bucking the trend, and it's really visionary, and this is why it's such an important song. And to tie this into our own time, Jim Morrison, of course, was talking about the disillusionment in the 60s, but I feel that America since then has been doomed. The American empire has been doomed to confront its psyche, whether it's in Vietnam, whether it's in Iraq and Afghanistan, and now it's coming home. Now that we have the full and total globalization, which is really Americanization of the world, now the unconscious has no repository for its deeper psychic affects. No longer is the East this exotic, forbidden, exciting, almost romantic and fetishized place. Now that digital technology and the biosecurity state has fully integrated the world into itself, the closing of the West is doomed to repeat, But the thing is, the closing of the frontier didn't leave. It's still there. That psychic content, that mythos, the what they called the heart of darkness, the horror. It's still there, but it's going to come full circle. It's going to unleash itself throughout the global noosphere. And so now that America's frontier has been closed, that double act of conquering the frontier, conquering nature, the shining rock on the hill, but also the deeper American undercurrent that you can see in people like, Thoreau and Emerson, or in other like Western, like the cowboy poets, Sheldon Wallen talks about this, the undercurrent of the lament of the closing of the frontier. Now that America has fully closed its frontier, it's going to close the frontier now of the whole world. The whole globe is going to be subsumed under the unipolar decultured order. The deculturation of the world is going to flatten all differences. And Jim Morrison, I feel, in the end, is predicting this. He is taking cues from Nietzsche. He is taking cues from Jung. He is going forward, and he intuited. And again, I know this is like a schizo post, but he is intuiting this great foreclosing on the heart of the heart of the unconscious itself, the heart of darkness, but that darkness will be unleashed throughout all aspects of the global interconnected world interface. And this has been, really long rambling breakdown, all these different themes between the song The End and Apocalypse Now, and how it really is an alchemical work of total art. So please like, subscribe, comment, share. Please, I need more subscribers. I need this to go off. I need to grift. I need to grift. Get me to 1,000 subs. Let me have YouTube monetization. Please. I will do nothing but release empty painting videos with music of Bob Ross landscapes just to get the normies involved. Please, I need to grift. God bless. And goodbye.